Good morning. Yesterday we received another indication that the dramatic earthquake sweeping the Middle East is refusing to stop. We are here to discuss almost 2 years after the price, the future, and I take your permission to introduce our distinguished panelists. Ambassador Dennis Ross, who is an expert on Middle East throughout his different positions as special advisor to three American presidents, his efforts to bring together the Israelis and Palestinians. Is also the author of the inside story of fighting for peace in the Middle East, and I'm choosing deliberately this book out of his numerous publications. Salama Ne'emat, a former senior journalist for El Hayat, a reporter and commentator in Amman, in Washington and in London. Salama came here especially from Jordan. Sharif Diwani is also a Middle East expert who is shuttling in between Geneva and Egypt, is an Egyptian. Meir Dagan, the former head of Mossad and currently the chairman of Gulliver Energies, am I right? And last but not least, Mustafa Akyol from Turkey is a thinker, and he is responsible for a very highly recommended book on Islam without extremes. Let's start with the identical question. 1 year after the whole thing starts, I refrain deliberately from calling it the Arab Spring. Let's call it the Arab Awakening. What kind of Middle East is rising throughout? And let's talk about the young generation.
I think it was always a misnomer to call it the Arab Spring, because that implied that it was somehow this democratic flowering that was going to move in a very clear, linear, quick direction. It was never going to be that. In too many places, you were looking at what was going to be the reality of a political vacuum, where, as I was saying a little earlier in the plenary, the Islamists had all the built-in advantages. They were organized, the secularists were not. They had an identity, the secularists did not. They could reach to the lowest impoverished classes, the secularists could not. So the built-in structure gave an advantage to them, number one. But there was something fundamentally positive about this, and what was fundamentally positive about it was this sense that, in fact, this profound anger at injustice and indignity had to end, and that people, after a period of enforced political coma, could have a voice and could try to act on their voice. And as I was again saying in the plenary, I said people saw themselves as citizens. They didn't have the institutions that would allow them to act fully as citizens or to create accountability as citizens. And the real challenge that we're going to see now is, how does the interplay of forces work out? Do the Islamists gain the control or means of coercion? Will they accept a political environment where there can be repeated elections? Will they not change the rules of the game? Will secular forces be able to organize themselves in a way so that they gain credibility, but also gain an unmistakable identity? What we've seen in Egypt is a competition among the liberal forces without a clear program, without a clear identity. Again, no big surprise, because they didn't have a history where they had the chance to organize themselves and create movements and to create an ability to reach out. So the challenge now is, how does this process unfold? What are the boundaries going to be? Who defines the boundaries? What's the nature of political competition? These are all basic questions to be answered. They were never going to be answered in a very short period of time. The real challenge, I think, again, is to recognize from the outside, people in the United States and in Western Europe and elsewhere around the globe, we have to realize we are not the authors of this story, so we're not going to be the ones who write it. But if there's a desire for help to develop, we should be prepared to offer it, but there also should be certain ground rules, and the ground rules should be that you respect minority rights, you respect international obligations, you respect women's rights, you respect the right of free speech and assembly. You know, help should be provided to those who are prepared to play by those rules. Those who aren't prepared to play by those rules, they shouldn't be entitled to get help. So this is going to be a process that unfolds over a long period of time. We don't have the ability to define it. It's going to be defined, and the destiny is going to be shaped by the people of the region. We have a huge stake in what happens, however, in that, and where we have the ability to work with others, particularly others around the globe, we should create what I like to call standards of accountability, where you repeat over and over and over again what should be the standards of accountability that people who define themselves as citizens within these countries hold these emerging governments to.
Lama, your country belongs to those lucky countries where the eagle or the storm is not landed yet. Do you see any preparations, any special preparations or measures taken by the regime so that people will not be out in the streets? Or do you see that the danger is still there?
Well, the fact is, the people are out on the streets on a weekly basis now, and the numbers are not as big as we've seen in other countries of the Arab awakening. And that goes to a number of reasons, where number one being the regime ruling in Jordan has never been as brutal as let's say, the Syrian or Libyan regimes. We have no opposition figures in jail. The security forces have not oppressed uprisings in a brutal manner. We don't have a single dead demonstrator or protester. And so the reaction to, or the demands for democracy, freedom, and human rights and equal opportunity have not stopped, but the people are not willing to go violent against the regime for fear that an alternative to the current order in Jordan might be much worse than what they have today. So I think that in Jordan, the storm did land. The country withstood the storm, the regimes withstood the storm, offered a number of reforms, concessions, constitutional reforms, and other concessions to the opposition, but it did not actually give up the fundamentals of the constitution, which makes the king continue to be the head of the executive authority. Now, looking forward, we must consider that Jordan does not live in a vacuum, and in that sense, whatever happens in Syria, and it is eventually going to unfold, will definitely affect Jordan in a very direct manner. Maybe Jordan and Lebanon, the two most vulnerable countries to what will emerge in Syria in the coming few months. I think that in a sense, the big picture of the confrontation taking place now in the region, apart from it being the confrontation between those who want to stay in power at any price, regimes mainly authoritarian or dictatorship regimes, oppressive to their own people, and as well as corrupt. These are the regimes that have survived the Arab Spring are maneuvering to maintain their status, their position of power, to give up only as little as possible. While the majority of people in different ways, of course, mostly peacefully, they're trying to get their rights from a state that has dominated them for decades. So apart from that, there is a bigger confrontation, which is a superpower confrontation, if you like, with the United States and its allies in the region versus Iran and its allies in the region, if you like. So we have what used to be formerly the axis of evil, whether it's an accurate term or not, is in confrontation now, not only with the West in general, but also with the moderate regimes in the region, moderate meaning not allied, in this case not allied with Iran, or the Syrian regime, or Hezbollah, or other radical forces. That big confrontation means that whatever happens in Syria, it's going to bring the confrontation between the United States and its allies with Iran to a head, in the sense that Iran considers Syria a very important foothold on the Mediterranean or in the region, and it will fight. There is no question about that. Russia, for its own geopolitical interests, is fighting against the fall of the regime, or at least is trying to extract concessions from the United States in return for backing a regime change in Syria, hopefully peacefully, though it doesn't look like it. So I think in general, every country in the region will be affected by the fall of the eventual fall of the Bashar Assad regime. I don't think that this regime, even fully backed by Russia and Iran, etc., and Hezbollah, can survive. We have an example of Iraq. Even a superpower like the United States has not been able to subdue the Islamic insurgency, whether Al-Qaeda or otherwise, until they finally had to make a deal and we had the emergence of the awakenings in Iraq that led to the defeat of Al-Qaeda, in my opinion. In Syria, the Syrians do not have the resources of the United States, and there is no way they can simply crush the uprising. The sad thing is that the opposition is increasingly becoming violent and more militant and more Islamist in that sense. The longer it takes, the ones who stay in the field fighting are the ones who are hardcore ideologists, Islamists, and the liberal and secular elements of the opposition will retreat as they are now in favor of the radical and hardline elements. The longer the regime stays, the more damage is to the Syrian state, and Syria risks becoming ungovernable unless regional and international powers intervene to accelerate the process of the removal of the Bashar Assad regime in order to have a leverage over what happens in Syria tomorrow. Thank you.
Sharif, I want to use your presence here and give us a private lesson on the question which is troubling every Israeli. What kind of Egypt is rising in front of our eyes, and what should we expect?
Okay. Shmada, to answer your questions, I would like to actually just touch on the Arab scene in general. And whether we call it an Arab uprising or the spring or sunrise or whatever, I think we fundamentally are seeing an unreversible process in which the young generation had uncovered to all Arab citizens the feeling of citizenship, as you spoke about it this morning, Dennis. There is no going back. I think what we are seeing is a normal process of evolution, of powers playing for survival versus evolution or complete change. It's absolutely normal. And it is a matter of different scenes, different countries have different scenes and different scenarios and how they will actually come out of the existing paradigm of relationship between people and rulers. So that the point is to be made here that we should understand that there is constantly expectation that we will see one country after the other changing the way the rules or the relationship between people and rulers. We have to remember this. And Egypt is one case. Now, on the Egyptian scene, I think if there's another word more profound than fluid, I would use it, but I think it's extremely fluid. And fluid in many ways in a positive way, and of course it creates risks that we have to understand, and I will touch on two risks. But fluidity, which I'd like to also define here, is that as we see the political groups struggling for power, in many ways, we are ending up with what the previous regime with Mubarak and his network or structure continued to dig or to chart is actually the dichotomy between the military with Mubarak and the National Democratic Party and the Islamic. I mean, we ended up with that today. That's a choice which is very unfortunate. Had we had a different situation where there are more secular elements allowed to organize, we obviously would have had a different scene than we have now. But we are there. We have a Muslim Brotherhood, which is the currently majority. It is a party which is dealing with fluidity in an interesting way. They are constantly reacting to and being affected by their role in official political process. They have been changing. If we witness the signals of their leadership 1.5 years ago on what kind of vision they have for Egypt and what we are listening from them today, there's a huge evolution. And the evolution is a result of the fact that this group has two currents at least. We all know about them, the more radical one and the more progressive one. And the progressive one is currently ruling and leading in many ways. And that evolution of the Brotherhood is because the scene or the circumstances allowed them to actually engage, and they were successful in taking a good share of the election or the seats in the parliament. Now, 2 points quickly, I'm running out of time, but the reaction of these political groups, including, or most importantly, that of the Muslim Brotherhood, is going to be a function of two things. Actually, I'd like to retract that. I think the reaction of whoever ends up in power, whether the military or the Muslim Brotherhood, there are two things we need to watch for. The economic situation is extremely bad. And it's very difficult to imagine how the expectations of those people who went to the square, with the majority of the people who were in Tahrir Square when the revolution happened, that they will be satisfied in economic terms. We will have a serious problem in that. And how the reaction would be to this kind of, there will be civil unrest, there will be demands, because people have seen or sensed citizenship now, and they will demand. And it is not going to be a very stable situation, even with military rule. So the reaction of the Brotherhood, if they are in power, would be actually to resort to moral force to stay in power. And the reaction of the military, if they are in power, is to resort to oppression, I have to say, in the old sense of the way, to stay in power.
Very optimistic.